Hello, fabulous listeners. Thanks for tuning in to Old Bodies Outside. This is your host, Brian Peterson. This episode's guest is Leslie Alford, who is a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. Leslie served in the Army for 24 years before retiring. However, her military career began with a debilitating injury. During Army Officer Candidate School, Leslie was training on an obstacle course and suffered a debilitating fall, which resulted in 4 fractured vertebrae, a broken wrist, nerve damage, scoliosis, and other injury-related issues. The doctors thought she was likely paralyzed, yet she overcame the odds and had a gratifying military career. During this episode, we'll learn more about how Leslie was able to continue serving in the Army, and about her determination to thrive and to not let her injury beat her. Leslie, it's a pleasure to have you on Old Bodies Outside.
It's great to be here, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
I'm very excited. Thank you.
Yeah, so I came across your story. As you know, Leslie, I'll get the listeners up to speed here. I came across your story because Leslie does yoga with my wife. I think Leslie and my wife have been doing yoga together for many years, and Leslie shared one of her stories with my wife, and I came across this great story of Leslie overcoming this really, really horrible injury, but then overcoming it, not letting it get to her, and continuing on. I just thought it was a really wonderful and inspiring story to share with listeners, and so that's why I invited Leslie on the Old Bodies Outside.
Well, it feels like a very old story, you know?
Yeah, it was what? It started in 1985?
1985. It was a defining moment, for sure.
Yeah. Well, before we jump into your story, I first wanted to kind of ask you some background questions before we get into that story of your debilitating fall. So first thing I kind of want to ask you, Leslie, was your story of overcoming this injury is one of resiliency and perseverance. And what was your childhood like, and what types of experiences do you think cultivated your resilient disposition?
I think my parents raised us that way. We didn't know there was any other way. My mother used to say we would go on vacation every year and we would go camping. It was always outdoors. It was always the end of the road, and then we would travel a little bit farther just to get away from everything. And when I joined the Army, I remember her saying, you're joining the Army because you're used to torture. We raised you to enjoy that. But I always did. And my parents both came from families where they had to be independent and they had to be pretty self-reliant. And I think that was just what we grew up with. My brother and I was the same kind of attitude. My dad was raised in far west Texas during the Depression. I like this story, but he and his little brother were raised by their father, who had a second-grade education. He worked hard. It was during the Depression. They didn't have hardly anything. His mother left them when my dad was about 6, I think, and his brother was 4. So they didn't raise themselves, but they had to be very self-reliant. They had to grow up early. They had to do things for themselves, and that's been kind of a defining factor for my dad's entire life. And he is still alive, and he lives here close to me now. But the older I get, the more I appreciate, I think, his frame of mind is always so positive. He went through some hard stuff, but he's always had a very positive outlook, very curious about people, about life, about places, wanting to explore. And my mother was much the same way. So that's just the way they raised us. And when you're little, you don't know there's any other way except for the way you're raised. And that's what we grew up with.
And that positive mindset, do you that I feel like breeds gratitude for the small moments, gratitude for the large moments. And it seems like that's a perspective that can be fostered in individuals, children, and adults. And I think, like, gosh, it really makes life so much more glorious when you have that positive mindset that you see the gratitude in moments.
It does. It does. And until I got older, I didn't realize that, not all of my friends had the same benefits. Not all the people around me grew up with that mindset. You think everybody is the same until you get older and you begin to see it. But it's something that I've always been grateful for, because I think it does bring a lot of goodness. If you can focus on the same incident, but depending on your mindset, it can be positive or negative, or you can make it positive or negative. Most things aren't clearly black and white. Your outlook and your perspective is going to make the difference in the way you feel, and the way you respond to it, and the way it turns out for you in many cases, I think.
Yeah, and was that ever, when you were a kid, just kind of concretely explained to you? How did your parents instill that in you?
I have thought of that often because I've had that question before. So many things that my parents did instill in us, I don't remember any specific conversation. I don't remember there wasn't a lesson, you need to listen to this, or we're going to tell you something you need to remember as you grow older. It was mostly just observation. They were great examples. Their relationship with each other, their relationship with other people, their outlook on things. And my mother especially, she was very much an introvert, but nobody would have known that. And she could say things with very, very few words and get her message across. My dad, he just did things. He was the social butterfly who liked to get out and meet people, and was, like I said, to this day, he's still curious about things. He has age-related dementia, which means in his case, he has no short-term memory. He can remember 100 years ago, he can remember when he was 20, but he can't remember if he ate breakfast or not. And he is aware of that. He knows that he can't. But he's got such a positive outlook about it and he can come up with some incredibly weird and random pieces of information that just boggle my mind sometimes. I went to Africa last year. I came back. I had pictures of elephants. And he's telling me all this stuff about elephants, the difference between the Asian elephant, African elephant, different things that I'm going, where did you learn that? And why do you remember it now? But he's always been interested in learning. And my mom, like I said, she could say things with very few words and get her point across very well. So I don't remember a whole lot of talk, but a whole lot of examples. Yes, that was more of how they taught us, was by watching their example.
Yeah, well, that's really inspiring, especially as you know, I'm a new stepfather, and the power of example is very strong. So that was a really good reminder, and also inspiring, because I think that, going back to the start of just this piece of conversation, gratitude is just so important in life, and a positive mindset is so important in life. It might be one of the more, I don't want to say the most important, but one of the more important aspects of moving forward in a happy way. And it's something that we want for all our kids.
Yeah. I can remember even in the Army, walking into new situations that were maybe intimidating, being put on the spot in front of a lot of new people, a new chain of command, and thinking, okay, I can be intimidated by this, or I can just walk in there and take charge.
Yeah.
Be big, be bold. And the times when I went in with that positivity turned out good. It had a positive effect on people around as well. And those were lessons that I learned and I relearned over and over again. Sometimes because I was doing it right, sometimes because I did it wrong. And I had to remind myself about that. Of course, there's no guarantee one way or the other, but often that made a difference.
Yeah,
Made a difference.
I liked how and I liked how you said that with coming in with that positive attitude. It got everyone else positive, and it seems like from there on, you can, creatively solve any problem that's ahead of you and your team and work it out and whatnot. And people are willing to work together, and it's a great foundation.
Sometimes it was the fake it till you can make it kind of attitude, which has a lot of benefits.
Yeah. I think it sounds like a really great tool to use. And I know that, with any career, there's aspects with it that are overwhelming or intimidating. I wouldn't say in my career I feel too intimidated, but I feel overwhelmed. And I think that maintaining that positive attitude is essential.
Yeah, I agree. It will get you a lot farther than a negative one will, for sure.
That's right. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about your father, and you talked about his childhood a little bit, and very modest childhood in West Texas. But he also served in the Air Force, and I want to know, what kind of career did he have in the Air Force, and how did that inspire you to be in the military?
Yeah, he spent 21 years in the Air Force, and he retired as a master sergeant. And so I was born in Japan and grew up on Air Force bases, went to school several different places before he retired. And I remember, once again, I don't remember concrete conversations, but I always was aware of what he did for a living. He was a civil engineer, and he could build anything. In the Air Force, he did build a lot of big construction projects, smaller ones too. But depending on where he was and what unit he was assigned to, there were times when we would come home from school or whatever, and he wouldn't be there. We'd look in the closet, the front closet, wherever we lived, had his go bag, and sometimes it would be gone. And we knew that we would not see him until we saw him. There was no telling how long it would be. Fortunately, most of the time they were training exercises, but I always was aware of what he did and kind of why he did it. And to me, even as a little kid, I was proud of that. I felt like he was doing something that was important, that was something that was to be respected, to be proud of. And I always thought that I wanted to do the same thing. I can remember a couple of times one time in particular, we lived close enough to his office that at the end of the day, when they played retreat, took the flag down, I could run down and watch it. And I was probably 5 or 6 years old, but I could run down and watch it, and how that made me feel. It just kind of gave me chills. This was something big, something worthwhile, and I always wanted to do something that was worthwhile. I was not going to be, I didn't think that I had the talent or the ability to do or the patience to do some things. I wasn't going to be a neurosurgeon, and I wasn't going to be an Olympic gymnast, which would have been very cool, but I wasn't going to do that. That didn't appeal to me. The military was something that I always felt like I could find a niche and fit in and be and do well. I always felt like I could be a leader and I could teach people. And I have felt like I was given a lot growing up that I could give back to other kids coming into the military. And then our overall mission was something to be proud of too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so your dad, in his career with the Air Force, you were focused on the Air Force at first, weren't you?
I was. I actually joined the Air Force for a hot minute. And I still remember my recruiters' names. Sergeant Johnson in the Air Force, he was so good. He was so good. But I wanted to go to officer candidate school. And he told me to apply for it. After I got to basic training, I was going to get it. There wasn't any question about it, but they couldn't guarantee it to me in my enlistment contract. And I already had I had 2 college degrees. So I didn't want to go in and stay enlisted. So I had an appointment with Sergeant Johnson at the Air Force recruiting station in Dallas one night. And we lived about 2 hours away. And of course, recruiting stations aren't always in the best parts of town. So I went to meet him, and he wasn't there. There was nobody in the office. He'd gotten tied up and delayed. And it was raining, and it was dark, and it was late, and it was a bad part of town. And the Army recruiting office was open because it was a bigger office. And I ducked in there saying, I just want to get out of the rain. And it was like cat on a mouse. You're here, you're in our door, we can talk to you now. So my Army recruiter said that he could guarantee me OCS. There were hurdles to pass and tests to take and all that kind of good stuff. But he said he could get me there before I actually went to basic training. And bless his heart, he had never done this before. He had never enlisted somebody for officer candidate school. But he walked me through that whole process and worked hard and did a great job. Got me into OCS. So I had to leave the Air Force, transfer over to the Army, and it worked out. It worked out fine. For a little while.
That's right. So the Army recruitment office was next to the Air Force recruitment office?
Yeah, a lot of times they're co-located. Most of the time they're co-located if they can.
Yeah,
so
does that ever happen? Like Army and Marines, Navy and Marines next door too?
Well, at one point in my career, I was a recruiting commander. That's a story in itself. I was supposed to be in the job for 2 years. I ended up being in it for 3 years because I couldn't get out. And that was very interesting. It was at a time when Army recruiting was really, it's always difficult. But at that particular time, we were having a hard time making numbers, getting people to enlist. And I had one recruiting station. I think I had 5 stations and 2 substations. So I had 17,000 square miles of territory that I covered.
Wow.
And in our bigger stations, the services were all co-located. We had Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines together. The Marines were always hard to compete with because they always looked so sharp and they always had an attitude of, the hard to get. And so that was the appeal of them. But we had some fun. At one point, we were at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and even though I wasn't located on post, the commanding general said, "Whatever you need, let me know, and I'll give it to you." So I asked him for a van. I asked him for a Humvee. I said, "A Humvee, nice military vehicle, one of those sharp combat vehicles, and I could paint it black, and I could put Uncle Sam on the front of it." And he said, "Sure." So I got this Humvee, painted it shiny black, put a big decal of Uncle Sam on it. We drove it around town, and whichever one of my station commanders made their numbers, whoever achieved the most in a month got to have it for the month. So there was big competition with that. But at one point, somebody set fire to our van.
No.
Some kids decided that they were going to have some fun, and they set fire to the van, set fire to the Humvee, and what we did to the Navy, because we loved to pick on the Navy, and their recruiting vehicles had the magnetic signs. So we took their magnetic signs off of their vehicles, put it on the burnt out wrecks of ours, and said, join the Navy and drive one of these. That didn't go over very well, but it was all in fun.
I gotta imagine there's a lot of fun with all the recruitment offices next to each other.
There can be. Sometimes it can either be a good humor or not. And we had some good people next to us, so it usually was positive. Practical jokes and things of that sort, but nothing ugly.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of police stations and fire stations located next to each other and the practical pranks that kind of go on between the two of them that I've heard about before.
Yeah. We did have the one time I was in it was the same town, different station. I happened to be there. The Navy recruiting station commander walked over and said, hey, I'm bringing my boss over to meet you. And I thought, his boss, I didn't know what rank his boss was. And to me, I still got the Navy ranks confused because they looked different. So he brought this person over who was a full admiral, and I had no idea. So I wasn't disrespectful, but it wasn't until after they left that I realized what the rank was and how I had treated him just like, my friend from next door. And I was a young captain, and this was an admiral, so I felt appropriately embarrassed after that.
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the missed the rank and didn't quite respect the rank.
Yeah, I felt pretty silly for a little while, but then I thought back and I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't say anything wrong, but I would have been a little bit different if I had actually paid attention.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's jump to back to 1985. You're going into Army OCS, correct? And
Correct.
You're getting going with that. You're going through a bunch of trainings. I think early on you may have unknowingly fractured your pelvis, and then you had your debilitating fall. Is that correct?
That's correct. I thought I had pulled a muscle, and it wasn't until after I fell on the obstacle course that I found out that, I had a cracked pelvis too. And I had gone through about 10 weeks of OCS at that point with this pesky pulled muscle that wasn't a pulled muscle.
And so what happened on what part of the obstacle course did you fall off on, and how far did you fall?
It's what they call the slide for life. It's one version of the slide for life, and it's a tower, a triangular tower that you climb up, and you get to the top, and there are ropes that swing out to another tower that's, I don't know how far away, but you get to the top of it. You have to reach out, grab the rope, swing your legs out, wrap your legs around the rope, and pull yourself down to the other tower, and then you drop off. It wasn't really, it was probably 18 feet, something like that. It wasn't a terribly high thing. But what I learned later is women's bodies, like women athletes who train very, very hard and they can deplete the minerals and things from your body, can make your bones brittle, just like osteoporosis when you're older. So I probably should have bounced, but I didn't. I broke instead. When I came off I actually thought about not doing the obstacle because it scared me when I saw it. And you had to get to the top and swing out over empty space and wrap your legs around the rope. And I thought it was a wide space, and you kind of had to make a leap of faith, both figuratively and literally, to get onto that rope.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't like the looks of it. At that point in the course, this was not a required exercise, so I thought I'd skip it. Then somebody else that I didn't measure myself against her, but she was so strong and so fit and so capable, and she just went up and did it. And I thought, well, if she can do it, I can too. So I did, to a point. I got up there, I got on the rope, I got down to the other end, and I was scared. I didn't like the obstacle at all, but I was determined to do it. So I got to the other end, and people were below me, and they said, drop and we'll catch you. I didn't want anybody under me. I told them all to move, and they did. And we had not been trained on how to properly fall, how to roll when we hit. I hadn't been trained to do that. So when I fell, I landed on my heels and my butt and crushed my back. And I couldn't feel anything right then. Physically, I could not feel anything. And I remember I laid down, and people automatically go to help you. And I remember telling them, don't touch me. I've hurt my back. Couldn't feel it. But I felt like something was wrong. So they called the ambulance over. The medics came, told me to get up and walk to the truck, and they would take me to the hospital. And I said, no, I'm not going to get up. We happened to have in our OCS class right then, there were 2 prior service guys who were actual Special Forces medics. And they said, okay, we're going to help her. And they put me on a backboard, put me into the truck. Inside the ambulance truck, the medics that were assigned to us tried to get me to sit up to go to the hospital, and I said, I'm not going to. So the guys in my class said, we'll go with you and make sure somebody doesn't do something like this to you. And if it hadn't been for them, I don't know how this would have turned out. But they made sure that I was stabilized. They made sure that I didn't move, that I didn't sit up, that I didn't try to do anything else, and got me to the hospital. And I remember company commander coming, my tactical officer coming, and I remember being in the hospital, and they had to cut all my clothes off. They cut my uniforms, they cut my boots off, and I was mad that they cut my boots. Boots? You can't ruin my boots. I've got to go back to training. And this was my primary concern then, was I have to go back to training, and you're ruining uniforms I need. So the doctor and my company commander and my battalion commander were just kind of all looking at each other like they knew something I didn't. And of course they did. And they told me I had broken my back. And I remember telling them, no, I broke my wrist. My wrist really hurts. Would you please look at my wrist? My back feels fine. I don't feel anything. But I didn't get up again for a very long time. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was in shock. And I was angry because they wouldn't let me go back to training. I was angry because they weren't paying attention to my wrist. I was angry because they cut my boots off. I didn't want to have to repeat officer candidate school. Nobody wants to go through that twice. It's not so much fun the first time that you want to do it again. But I had no choice. And that was on July 8th. I remember that because we had just had a little bit of a break for the 4th of July. And I think I got up and started walking again in September. It was a good while. Yeah, it was a long time. And then I went home in a body cast.
Yeah, so you went home in September in a body cast?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And during this time in the hospital, after July 8th, maybe a few weeks later, 4 weeks later, your shock is well worn off. The reality has set in. How did some of those factors, some of those mindset things that were examples in your childhood? I mean, you're in a very tough situation at this point. You're in a full body brace and just stuck in bed.
Stuck in bed, and they didn't put me into the full body cast until I was able to get up. They told me that I could not move, that it had to heal, it had to stabilize. And I was in a smaller brace while I was laying in bed. And I had people come in and say, oh, I don't know how you do it. I couldn't stay still this long. And I thought, what choice do I have? I want to get up and be normal. And it's kind of like, I remember thinking, it's like seatbelts. If you put them on after the accident, it's too late. So I've got to do what they tell me to do. And I want the best possible outcome for this. So I'm going to do what I'm told, which hasn't always happened in my life. I'm not always real good at doing what I'm told. But the consequences, if I had shifted anything incorrectly, if I had nicked the spinal cord, if I did anything like that, I wouldn't be walking. And I thought, with that kind of an option, of course I'm going to do what I'm told. I can lay here for as long as they need me to. I did get very antsy after a while, but the people in the hospital, they were so good. I had great doctors. There were good staff in there. There were people who came in to visit me after a while. They came regularly. Nobody that I knew, because my family wasn't there. The people in my class had to go on with their training, so they weren't free to come and visit. But I made some friends, even in the hospital. There was another captain who had been in airborne school. She was a captain. I was not. But she had been in airborne school and just shattered her leg. So she would come in, visit with me, bring me things. Every time anybody went down to the shopette, to buy whatever, they'd ask me what I wanted. They would bring me food from outside. But I remember in particular this captain who had broken her leg. There was an elderly man. I say elderly, he was probably 70. And his wife was in the military hospital there. But he would stop in and see me. And he was just a nice guy. And I appreciated that so much. We had a nurse's aide who was fantastic. I mean, every day would come in and ask me what I wanted, what I needed, whether it was in the hospital or outside the hospital. She would get it for me. There was a military policeman in there who had hurt himself, but he could get up and get around. We got to be very good friends. I actually got a job out of that hospital. The hospital photographer would come around, and actually the hospital chaplain, he had a tough job because he didn't always have good news to bring to people. And he did a lot of end-of-life things in the hospital, as you can imagine. And it got to where he would come and visit me at the end of his day when he was feeling bad. And he would just come and kind of decompress. And he said he always felt better after he left me because I had a good attitude. I never thought I was going to be paralyzed. I never thought I was going to be permanently disabled or anything. It just didn't compute. It wasn't hard-headedness. It just wasn't real. I couldn't visualize that. And I had all these great people helping me. So the chaplain would come in and visit me. We got to talking. I told him about my interest in photography. He linked me up with the hospital photographer, and when I came out of the hospital, I got a job doing photography for Fort Benning.
Nice.
Yeah, it was good. So I did medical photography, I did studio photography, I did VIP, I did training events. I got to go out with the Rangers and fly around in helicopters and take pictures. And actually, some of my pictures were used for Army recruiting ads overall. So it turned into something very good that was an opportunity that I never would have had otherwise.
Yeah, and it seems like, the chaplain coming to you last and kind of just enjoying your good attitude and whatnot. Probably, did that help you too, just to hear about the challenges that he had to go through on each day, and that people were experiencing a lot worse challenges in a way than you were?
They were. And it did help me because it gives you something to, I hate to say that you compare yourself to other people, but you do. And you look at other situations that are worse than you. And I always felt, if I felt low, if I felt depressed, I would feel kind of guilty for that because I was biding time. I was going to heal. I was going to be okay in my mind. So I had nothing to feel depressed about. And also when he would come in, I understood that he had a very difficult job and he was a good man. You could tell that he carried people's burdens with him. And I felt like I needed to do something for him. Do something for the person who does so much for everyone else. To try to make him,
like that.
Give him a little bit of something more positive than maybe what he had gone through that day.
Yeah. So you got out in September of '85, and you're now working as a bit of a photographer. Is that correct at that time?
Well, I didn't get out. I got to go home on convalescent leave for 30 days to Texas. And then I came back. I was still assigned to the hospital at that point. So that's when eventually I was discharged from the hospital, sent back to officer candidate school, but I am not allowed to do anything. I'm in a cast, full body cast. So I worked at my battalion for a little while. That was kind of fun too. I got to run the officer candidate school Hall of Fame, and when people were nominated for it, I had to track them down wherever they were in the world. And a lot of times people wanted it to be kind of a surprise. They didn't want them to know. So I had to find these people, get in touch with them, find out their life story, where they were now, and do all of this without spilling the beans about why I was doing it. So that was fun. But I did that for a while. And then they were going to move me over to a holding company, a medical holding company, because it was clear that the Army was not going to let me go back into training at officer candidate school. So I reported to my new company, and the first sergeant told me he was going to put me in personnel section. No. So I told him a little bit of a lie. I told him that I already had a job lined up and that I was going to work with the medical photographer at the hospital. So he said, that's fine. Just report in once a week and let me know you're still around and still kicking. I said, okay. I went over to the hospital and I found the medical photographer and I said, you've got to hire me. I've already said I'm working for you. So he did, put me to work there. And then I went to work in the training section of Fort Benning, doing all the other stuff too, doing more than just medical photography. It worked out great. So I kind of fudged it a bit.
Yeah, and but so this went on. And how long did this go on for?
That was, again, that would have been in the fall or maybe the early 1986. And I was discharged in early 1987. So about a year.
Okay, and you're with that. That's discharged from the hospital or the military, because you were medically discharged 12 years later, right?
Medically discharged from the Army. Yeah.
And so that would have been in 97?
1987. Yeah.
1987. Okay.
So that was when the Army severed all ties with me. And I was not happy about that because, again, I still thought this is an injury, not a permanent disability. I'm healed. I'm good to go. I can go back through training. But at that point in time, there were no active wars. We were at peace with everybody. The Army did not want anybody who could possibly be a liability. And with an injury like mine, they felt it was a liability. So they discharged me against my will, and I appealed that decision up to the point where I had no more appeals left, and I'm put out on the street. Have a nice life.
Gosh, and so when you're discharged from the Army, I'm assuming you cannot go and try to join a different branch, such as the Navy.
You can, yes. There are a lot of different flavors of discharge. But a medical discharge has nothing to do with the characterization of your service, whether it's an honorable or dishonorable. So, I had an honorable discharge, but it was medical. And the re-enlistment code for the Army said that I could not come back in because of physical issues. I actually did go to the other branches. I went to all the other branches. I went to the other components. I went to the Reserve, the National Guard, and everyone said, we don't need you. We don't need you because you're broken. You're flawed. Have a nice life.
Yeah. Okay. And so what were you thinking at this point?
I was getting frustrated. getting very frustrated. And I had 2 college degrees, pretty smart, pretty competent. This is what I wanted to do. I'd always wanted to do this. And I had been kind of sidetracked before I ever joined the Army to begin with. So now this was what I enjoyed it. The time that I was in the Army and the things that I did get to do, I enjoyed. And I wanted to keep doing it. Well, I went looking for civilian work, and I found out it was hard. And it was hard because people didn't want to hire me for the same reason that the Army didn't want me. I was broken. I was a liability. They would have to insure me. Nobody wanted to do that. And that had never occurred to me that that was a possibility. I never had trouble being employed. And again, through some other people, I ended up working for the Army Research Institute at Fort Benning. Then through that job, I went to work for a retired lieutenant general who had been the commander of Fort Benning at one time, and he'd opened his own consulting business. So I went to work for him, and it was a small company. We had a couple of retired colonels, another retired general, and myself. So I was the low man on the totem pole, and that was a lot of fun working for that company. I got to be the advance party for every job that we did. The companies, when we did trade shows and things like that, I was the one who went ahead, set things up for the companies that we represented. We did a lot of research projects and wrote up a lot of research products for different people, some of them about how to sell to the military, just various things. And I loved doing that. I loved doing that because every day it was something different. And I didn't have a 9-to-5 sit behind a desk job. But that all worked out in the sense that now I'm productively employed doing something that I really like. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. It was selling products. And I didn't have the same feeling of satisfaction that I was doing something worthwhile, something bigger than myself. And I remember I had a friend one time who, she made this offhand comment to me. She goes, well, if you can't be an officer in the Army, just marry one. It's almost the next best thing. And I thought, well, no, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Watching football is not the same as being the quarterback. You might enjoy watching it, but that's not playing, and life is not a spectator sport. I don't want to be a spectator here. Eventually, I made a friend through my job who had been in the National Guard unit there. And he was on active duty at this time, so he was regular Army, but he had been in the Guard unit that was co-located with us there. And he told me, he said, look, if you're really, really serious about going back in, let's go talk to my old personnel officer, because he's been in the job forever. He knows all the ins and outs, and if anyone can make this work, he can. I said, okay, sign me up. Let's go. He was able to work the system to get me through medical waivers and to get into the National Guard unit. So I got there, and they sent me back to officer candidate school. So I finished officer candidate school the second time around.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, had to go through the guard version of it that time. So I finished, I graduated, I got commissioned as a second lieutenant, and in the National Guard, you have to have a position available for you, and the unit has to agree to put you in it before you can accept your commission. In the regular Army, when you get commissioned, the Army gives you a job because you are employed full-time. Well, the Guard unit was an ammunition and explosives unit. So they gave me a job, they gave me the position, I was able to accept my commission. And once you accept your commission, you have to go to your career school and learn your basic field. So I went to the Ordnance Explosives School, and while I was there was one active duty slot that was being offered up on a competitive basis for the Guard and the Reserve officers to apply for. So I applied for that, and I think we had several classes with several people each who were applying for that one job. And that's an example of time I went in all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and, excited to be there, and because this was an active duty school, and I got there, felt good, made a good impression, and I got that one active duty slot.
Wow. Amazing.
So all the rest was kind of smooth after that.
Yeah,
the rest of the 24 years.
But how does the rest of the 24 years, went smoothly? I think you met your husband in the military, but what about your back and your injuries? You had overcome them, but was there still limitations?
I had to, it was kind of a fine line. I had some limitations, and I had to learn how to manage those. If I was not active enough, I had problems. The nerve damage in my leg, and I'd have back pain, and I'd have numbness in that side. And the same thing if I overdid it or did the wrong things. So I had to figure out where that sweet spot was.
Right.
And over time, I was able to manage that, but I couldn't really admit to having any issues.
Right.
Because again, you're in a competitive job where I was usually the only woman. And back then, even though things were better than they had been before, women were still not looked at with the same, weren't given the same level of respect or opportunities or looked at as being as competent. And yet I was really lucky. I worked for great people, but it was kind of, you didn't show weakness. So if I was in pain, I had to keep on.
Yeah, you had, it's an interesting explanation because you have the two things going on. You have the injury, the lingering kind of limitations of it, but also being a woman, you kind of had to step it up a little bit even further just of the fact of being a woman, and then you have the injury lingering too. So yeah, it's like almost like even if you had, I don't know, like a twinge, like you probably can't even show that to anyone, and you have to hold that in.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times. And you learned who your friends were. You learned who your supporters were. The injury I was able to manage because I was active again, and learning where that sweet spot was. I did that fairly quickly, so that I could kind of manage it. Although it took it took some trial and error at first.
Of course. Yeah.
But even so, if you had to work, long hours and out in the field or something like that, then I could feel it. But again, I worked for some really good people who really supported me well, so that if I needed to take a break, I could do it. I was always in leadership positions. I could do it. I had somebody to delegate to. I didn't disappear when it was important for me not to, things like that. So
Yeah.
I was really very fortunate in a number of ways, that the injury was not worse than it was, because it could have been a little bit worse and there would have been nothing I could have done about it, no matter what my mindset was. So I was really lucky there. And I was lucky in, I feel like Forrest Gump. You run across all these people during your journey, and so many of them were the right people at the right time in the right place for me. That it wasn't because I deserved it. It wasn't because I sought it out, but good people who were helpful and supportive, and it made all the difference.
Yeah, and it's. I feel like this combination of your positive attitude with the keep moving, and maybe moving is in not only like you to help make sure that you're not limited by your injury, but also moving and progressing through your career too, and how to move effectively and navigate that stuff. So it's almost like you had some literal and figurative types of movement going on to get through there.
Yes, right.
Well, it's so interesting. Go ahead.
Some of the things that helped were the fact that I wasn't smart enough to be scared when I might have otherwise been, when I was in situations with people who could affect me, and I thought of them as opportunities, not as being put on the spot, not as opportunities to fail, but as opportunities to succeed. And I think I worked really hard, and then things kind of fell into place for me at times too. But I came so close to not having the career that I wanted, that once I did have it, it was just, life is great, life is good, let's go out and just do it all and try to do it well. And I guess I was competent enough.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And so to this day, how do you still meet that the happy medium balance of getting movement in, most days, every day, but not overdoing it? I'm sure you know where that sweet zone is. You're very, very, sure where that sweet zone is. But what types of habits are you do each day to, make sure you're able to keep moving, you're not being overly limited?
Well, at this point, I'm a whole lot older and a whole lot lazier than I've ever been before. For instance, I really don't like cold weather, and I used to go out and run all the time, and now I'm like, check the weather, it's below 50, maybe I'm going to stay in. But what I do, which is how I met your wife, I had another health incident, and after that I walked into her studio, because I'd always thought of yoga as kind of a little, touchy-feely stuff. I always did.
A little hippity-dippity.
Oh, yeah, that's how I'd always kind of looked at it. And I wasn't sure that it would really be beneficial, because I did the hiking, the biking, the swimming, the running, and I did weights, I did all of that kind of stuff. But I'd had this in the back of my mind that maybe it was something I should check out. So I walked in after this other health thing, and I caught her in her office.
My blinds
So
just fell down, but that's okay.
you're very bright.
Yeah.
So anyway, I started doing yoga, and that was one of the best things that I have done for myself in a long time.
Wow.
Really, the benefits of that have been tremendous for me personally, mentally and physically. I do try to run or get on the elliptical machine every, let's say 5 days a week at least.
Wow.
And sometimes I'm more successful than others, but I've been pretty consistent with that. So I do try to stay active. I like to get out and go for a walk every day. I have a dog. He can walk himself, but I enjoy going with him. So there's that. I like being outdoors. I like being active. I like moving. But the yoga and the running or the elliptical machine are the two things that I consistently try to do, because I can feel an immediate benefit and a long-term benefit from that just, it alleviates a lot of the symptoms that I would have if I didn't do it. I get stiff, I get sore, I begin to get painful, I begin to have numbness, I don't have that whenever I do work out.
And so how long have you been doing yoga for?
Not as long as you think. I started, I think it'll be 2 years next month.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is newer. That is more recent than I expected.
Yeah, not very long.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's good that you found it. But I also liked earlier that you said, you still really enjoy getting back to nature. And that made me think of, we were talking about your childhood early on. And, one thing I meant to ask when we were talking about your childhood is, where did you grow up?
Different places. Like I said, I was born in Japan.
Born in Japan, yeah.
My little brother was born in Puerto Rico. And then we lived different places in the States. Missouri, Texas, a couple of places. Nowhere else. So we were kind of all over the place.
Yeah, well, that's fun, though. You got some good family travels in.
Yeah. Well, that's where Dad's personality really worked out for us, because we explored wherever we were. We got out and saw things. We met people. Yeah. So I didn't understand when he retired and we moved to Texas, to a small community in Texas. And I did not understand, first of all, how people hadn't traveled. How do you grow up and not travel? And how do you not want to? How do you not have a curiosity about the greater world than your little community? But apparently there are people like that who are not curious about things, who don't. We have these conversations, especially now where we're also interconnected with technology and social media and stuff. How do you not have a curiosity about people who are not like you, about places that you've never seen that are different from your home? And I don't understand that. And I feel like I'm very fortunate that I grew up with a lot of different experiences in different places, that I wouldn't trade that.
I feel like that's probably cultivated some of your positive attitude, just seeing how other people live and whatnot. And there's a lot of benefits to that. I know for myself, I grew up in Southern California. I lived some time in the Rocky Mountain region in Boulder, Salt Lake City. I also lived in South Carolina. I also lived in Kansas. And what I love about that kind of United States globetrotting is that's 4 kind of distinct cultural centers of the United States. And that's been something that I've had a lot of gratitude for, is seeing how our are citizens of the United States in these different regions, what the different cultures are like, how they live their lives differently. And that's been something that's been hugely beneficial for myself.
Yeah, that's huge. Those are very different areas. I know, joining the Army, going to basic training, we've got a group of people, most of them are very young, who are from all over.
Yeah.
All of them have a different accent, a different culture that they bring, a different habits, different words that they use, and just learning to embrace that instead of to resist it is a good thing.
Absolutely. I think like through those differences, we actually learn a lot about each other. Learn
Yes,
a
we
lot
do.
about the human nature. And I think it's actually a great thing.
I was a company commander, and I had a training company. So we took the kids the young soldiers who had just graduated from basic training, and we taught them to be, in my company, we taught them to be wheeled vehicle mechanics.
Okay.
So you've got all these young people, and I remember one time I had these two young men. If they looked at each other, they were fighting. I mean, they were trading blows. They hated each other. And they were very different parts of the country. One was black, one was white. They had totally different backgrounds. And just, I think one of them was from more of a rural area. One of them was from a big city. And I took them and I said, okay, we have to have battle buddies, somebody that you're going to watch out for and who's going to watch out for you. We did that as a normal thing. But I said, you two are going to be battle buddies. And that's it. You know, if one of you gets picked on, the other one's going to stand up for him, and vice versa. You're going to be each other's best friend. Well, no, they weren't. They hated each other. You're in a controlled environment. You know, I'm telling you, you have to be together, and you have to learn to do this. And it doesn't matter. Graduation, you can go your own ways and never see each other again, but you have to look out for each other as long as you're here. That's your mission. And by the time they really were very good friends by the time they graduated. They had learned about each other and got to know each other, and I thought that was probably one of the greatest things that I saw there. Was these two kids who came around and became friends when they swore they would never be friends. But we saw that a lot. Yeah, it was just an extreme case of it.
Well, I feel like with the military, the camaraderie is unmatched, and it's something that is, you know, people that have served, you know, talk about the camaraderie. I know that you had a very gratifying career. I know that you love that camaraderie. And so how are you to this day kind of staying connected with the military?
Well, one of the things, my husband and I both retired with 24 years service. And we, first of all, started kicking around, where are we going to go? Before the light bulb finally came on that retirement is not a reassignment in the Army. You don't automatically have to go somewhere else. And we thought, we can stay right where we are for once in our lives. And we love it here. People are nice. They make us feel at home. And they did when we first came. So that was great, because we had just come back from combat tours in Iraq when we got here. And the fact that it felt good, it felt like home. And we found a great place out in the country so we can get out and do stuff. So we stayed here. Then we started thinking about, what are we going to do for a living? We're not going to retire and do nothing. Although I told him that my initial retirement plan was to sit on the porch and drink coffee. That's really what I wanted to do with my time. But in trying to think about what I wanted to do, I did want to continue to work with soldiers because we have Fort Riley right here. It is where we retired. We were still involved, but I didn't want to be with that person who sat around and told war stories until I was old and cranky. And I had never thought about real estate as a career field or as a job. But I had a broker approach me and say, have you ever thought about it? Well, the answer was no. But I thought this would be perfect opportunity to not have to do a 9-to-5 job, be able to work with soldiers, be able to help them. We had been in this position often enough where you're reassigned, you go someplace, you immediately have to find a place to live, get ready and go to work. You have very little time to do any of that. I spoke the language. I'd lived the life. I thought, this is how I can give back. So I began real estate with the idea that I would specialize in working with the military. And I never really specialized. I worked with a lot of military and a lot of civilians too, because when you start, you're going to work with whoever wants to work with you. So you want to be successful. But I found that we do work with a lot of military, and I really enjoy working with the young soldiers, maybe the first-time home buyers, who you can help them through. And it's a difficult and it's a stressful process when it's your first time or when you're in the middle of a reassignment. So we've been doing that for 11 years now.
Oh, wow. I didn't know it was been on that long.
Yeah, we started, and my initial plan was 5 to 10 years in real estate, and then I could sit on the porch and drink coffee. But I'm still having fun at it. We're still having fun at it. So that's one of the ways that we're giving back. We're staying involved, helping soldiers.
That's a fantastic way to help soldiers too, and a way that maybe some people don't, like yourself, see immediately.
Yeah. Well, I think I see, not to pick on anybody, but an agent, just a generic agent who may have been born and raised here. They don't feel the same kind of pressure to get something done, to find a suitable house that suits their needs, that suits their desires, that they can drive up to, close on, and move in. And when you've got a spouse and 2 children, 2 dogs, a cat in your SUV, and you've been living in a hotel, when you drive into a town that you've never been to before, or you know very little about, you want somebody to help you. You need somebody to help you, and they can be very decisive, but knowing what information to provide, knowing how to help them navigate those things is huge, and especially the timeliness of it, because and I think we know that better than anybody, or as well as anybody, because we've been there often enough.
Yeah, you've lived it, so you know how to help expedite that process.
Yeah.
And so I also heard that in my preparations for this episode that you were on Senator Jerry Moran's, and Jerry Moran is a Kansas senator. You're on Senator Jerry Moran's most recent Service Academy Selection Board. And so what is all that?
That is, senators can recommend people to the service academies. So the Air Force Academy, to West Point, to the Naval Academy, people who want to go there, get their education and get their commission, They have to be recommended by somebody, and the senators get so many slots that they can recommend. So each year they go through the selection process. And it's a lot of fun because people from Jerry's region or district can apply to him. He takes all these applications. And I don't know how many of them are sifted out, but we spend an entire day. It's a whole panel of people, and we're set up in small groups, and it's like speed dating. You get these young people who come in front of you, and you interview them, and you evaluate them, and then we make our recommendations as small groups, and they're probably 40 people on the selection board. We're split up into groups of 3. So at the end of the day, each candidate has had 2 interviews. And we get together, we figure out who we want to send forward as our top recommendations, and then Jerry gets to make the selections of who he wants to recommend for the military academies. And he gets to do it for not just West Point, but for the others too. Oh, and then we have the Merchant Marine, actually. So
Nice.
the Military Academy at West Point, the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, and the Merchant Marine. And interviewing these young people, because most of them are just out of high school or even still in high school and they have applied, it's an incredible experience because you get to talk to so many of them. The first year I did it, it seemed like people were a lot more nervous to come in front of people that they didn't know. You're shooting questions at them, kind of rapid fire, and they're trying to figure out how to present themselves and what to say to you and what questions you're going to ask. And sometimes they just freeze.
Yeah.
But they're such an impressive group of people, and each time I've done it, they're really impressive. They're so young, and they've accomplished an awful lot in school, in civic activities, in sports, and so many of them are a lot of them are very polished, and they present themselves really well, and some of them just have a passion about them. You can feel it, but it's really it makes you feel good about the future of the country and the future of our military to go through this process, and you come away from it feeling like we did good. We did good in raising a bunch of good human beings, good citizens, whoever did that job, and prepared them for just coming in front of us. And they're going to go and do well at the military academy and hopefully go on from there and do well in the military too.
Yeah. Leslie, what a story. Joining the military in 85, getting medically discharged at 87, and you're still contributing to the military to this day. I mean, that is just fantastic.
It's been a good experience. Not necessarily the one I would have chosen, the way it went, but
Yeah.
I've gotten to do things that I never would have done otherwise. I'm very, very fortunate in many ways.
It's interesting how in life we kind of map out this trajectory in our minds, and we never know how it's going to go, right? Like we might stay in the bounds, say, of the military, but there's an infinite amount of ways probably it can go within the military. We see that in a lot of different careers, and it's quite an exciting adventure if you just let it unfold, I guess.
Well, I think you gain a lot if you're a little bit open to other possibilities sometimes.
Yeah. Well, Leslie, thank you so much for your service, and thank you so much for coming on Old Bodies Outside and telling your stories and how you overcame your injury and the time that you spent in the military with the Army. That was all so fascinating. I really enjoyed hearing it. So thank you for coming on Old Bodies Outside.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and speaking of gratitude, I'm definitely full of gratitude that you were able to come on and record an episode with me.
Me too. Me too. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to throw on that outro music and we'll call it an episode.
Okay.